Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Christmas at the Monroe house always felt like standing trial under a tinsel-covered noose. The table was laid out just the same as it had been every year since I could remember: stiff linens that smelled faintly of mothballs, dusty china that only came out for holidays, and enough passive aggression in the air to frost the windows from the inside. My mother, Judith, perched at the head of the table like the queen of some collapsing dynasty, her thin smile pulled tighter than the ham's plastic wrap. My father, Howard, sat 2 seats down, already 2 fingers deep into the scotch he claimed he only drank on special occasions, which somehow included every weekend, most Mondays, and anything with the word Eve in it. I had come because I always did, out of habit, out of some aching loyalty to the version of family I kept hoping existed beneath the surface. I brought my own casserole, contributed to the wine, and even helped Dean, my younger brother, wrap gifts last night when he called me panicking because of course he had waited until the last possible moment. Dean never planned ahead, not for Christmas, not for bills, not for rehab. And yet, somehow, he was still the golden boy, the recovering hero, with a second chance everyone clung to like it made up for the first 30 years of failure. I took my usual seat, the one closest to the kitchen near the draft, where the furnace's groan reminded me with every burst of heat that I'd paid the gas bill again this month. That was the part no one at the table seemed to remember. Or maybe they did remember, but it made them uncomfortable. Easier to call me generous in passing and change the subject than to really acknowledge that I was the reason their house hadn't been repossessed 5 years ago, or that Dean's latest stint in that fancy rehab in Arizona came with my name on the invoice. The food was decent. It always was. My mom could still cook, even if she couldn't admit when she was wrong. The turkey was dry, but the stuffing was good, and the cranberry sauce was homemade, not canned, which she liked to mention twice. We all dug in, chewing and nodding and pretending this was normal. My Aunt Carol asked if I was still working from home, in the same tone you'd used to ask someone if they were still on parole. I told her yes, I was still consulting, still working with startups, still surviving, all without a husband or a mortgage or a Christmas tree tall enough to touch the ceiling. The worst part wasn't the judgment. I was used to that. It was the way they acted like my life choices had been accidental. Like I'd stumbled into being unmarried, child-free, and financially independent, rather than clawing my way through jobs, therapy, and late-night budgeting spreadsheets just to keep my sanity and theirs afloat. They thought I was aimless because I hadn't picked the traditional boxes to check. They didn't see that I had chosen this life, and chosen, over and over again, to help them live theirs. When my mother started pouring coffee, I felt the shift coming before it happened. Her eyes tightened, her shoulders went back, and she gave that little sniff that always meant she was preparing to deliver one of her hard truths. She only served them cold. "You know," she said, settling the cream beside my plate with all the elegance of a woman about to drop a bomb, "you've been living off us long enough." Silence. Every fork on the table paused midair. The room went dead still, like we all understood that something had just broken, something brittle and unspoken that had held the fragile piece of this family together for years. I looked at her, blinking once, twice, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Living off them? I had wired the mortgage money from my account last week, again. I had paid the property taxes last year when they forgot. I bought the tires on Dad's truck and the new fridge when the old one finally croaked. Every Christmas card I mailed had a $100 gift card tucked inside because I knew no one else would be sending one. And she thought I was living off them? There was a long beat before anyone dared to breathe. Dean sipped his soda. Carol looked at the ceiling. My father scratched at the corner of his napkin, pretending not to notice that I had gone stone still. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck and something shift in my chest, not quite rage, not quite grief, but something heavy and bitter and old. Something that had been waiting a long time to come out. I didn't say a word. I stood up, placed my napkin neatly on my chair, and walked to the front hall. My coat was still warm from the radiator. I slipped it on slowly, like I was zipping up armor. In the living room, the tree twinkled mindlessly, indifferent to what had just taken place 20 feet away. In the mirror by the front door, I looked at myself. My face was calm, but my eyes were glassy, sharp. I turned the knob and stepped outside into the cold December air. From behind me, I could still hear my mother's voice, not calling me back, not apologizing, just saying something about dessert. I drove home in silence, not angry. Something deeper. A kind of clarity. That was the last time I would sit at their table and pretend they deserved my loyalty. The gloves were off. The bills were about to come due. And I was done paying for everybody's delusion. I didn't cry on the drive home, but I did talk to myself in the car like some woman halfway to losing it, hands gripping the wheel harder than necessary while the streetlights passed in a blur. I kept hearing her voice, my mother's voice, spitting that line like it was some holy truth. "You've been living off us long enough." That sentence didn't even belong to reality. It came from whatever fantasy world she'd been building in her head all these years, one where I was still the aimless teenager who used to lock herself in the bathroom just to avoid Sunday brunch fights. And even then, I never lived off them. I was the kid who started working at 16 and never asked for a cent unless it was for books or bus fare. When I got home, I dropped my keys harder than I meant to and stared at the cheap fake tree I'd put up in my apartment's corner last week. The lights blinked soft and dumb, like they didn't know the world had just shifted under my feet. I kicked off my boots, pulled my laptop out from the bottom drawer where I'd stashed it so no one would see it today, because God forbid I look too comfortable while visiting my bankrupt family. And I started logging into every damn payment portal I had ever used on their behalf. It was longer than I remembered. 12 years of standing orders and quiet bailouts. I had paid their mortgage ever since Dad's disability checks stopped covering even the basics. I'd paid their water bill through my own auto debit because it slipped their mind too many times. I covered their damn internet so Mom could still FaceTime with her quilting group and pretend she wasn't 5 months behind on everything else. Over the years, I said out loud as I opened yet another bank receipt, I must have wired at least $23,000, or maybe it was $13,000. Math was never my strong suit. And yes, that number might have been off. I never kept precise track. I wasn't expecting a thank you or an award. Hell, I wasn't even expecting kindness. But I sure as hell wasn't expecting that. I canceled the gas payment first. That one stung the most for me. I'd set it up after one cold January 6 years ago, when their pipes almost froze and Mom called me at 2 in the morning whispering like someone might overhear her need. I remember how she said, "Just this once," and I said okay. That once turned into 72 payments, not that anyone ever counted except me. Next was the electric. Then the internet. Then the trash bill, which I'd taken over quietly when I saw the city warning on their curb once and didn't want the neighbors to gossip. One by one, like shutting down parts of a machine that had been running too long on borrowed time, I pulled the plug on everything. No text to warn them. No call. I didn't even send a passive-aggressive message. I just clicked cancel, watched the confirmation screen load, and felt something loosen in my chest. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first breath I'd taken in years that didn't come with guilt attached. The next morning, I sat with a mug of cheap coffee, scrolling through photos from a trip I never took, the one to Italy I'd planned twice and canceled both times. Once because Dean had crashed his car drunk and needed bail, and once because my parents claimed they were about to lose the house again. I had forgotten how many times I'd pressed pause on my life to make sure theirs didn't fall apart. I'd told people I didn't travel because of work. Because I was too busy. But the truth was, I had been funding someone else's survival with my dreams. And for what? So they could sit around a damn ham and act like I was the burden? The first call came that evening. Mom's number flashed on my phone, and I let it ring out. No voicemail. Just silence. Then, an hour later, Dean tried. He left a message saying the internet wasn't working, and he had an interview over Zoom tomorrow, which I knew was code for Mom told me to call and guilt trip you because we're too damn proud to say we're scared. The next day, the real fallout started. It was cold that week, one of those brutal Midwest cold snaps where even the dogs don't want to go outside. I knew they'd start noticing the gas first. No hot showers, no heat, nothing but space heaters if they had them, and even those wouldn't help for long. I imagined my mother standing in her kitchen, wrapping herself in that ugly fleece blanket from the den, clicking at the thermostat, convinced it was just a glitch. I didn't take joy in it. Not really. But I also didn't feel sorry. Because this wasn't vengeance. Not yet. This was consequence. They had pushed the lie so long, they forgot who was holding the damn ladder. And now it was gone. By the time the second night rolled in, I had 2 more missed calls, a text from Carol asking if everything was all right, and 1 panicked voicemail from my dad that started with "Now look here" and ended with "We're gonna need to talk." Talk? We should have talked 12 years ago. But they were too busy looking past me to see the person I'd actually become. Now, they were going to see me. 1 missed bill at a time. The first night after I shut everything off, I slept better than I had in months, maybe years, not because I was proud or righteous or glowing with revenge, but because I finally stopped twisting myself into a human safety net stretched too thin under a family that never even noticed I was the one holding them up. I woke up just past sunrise, wrapped in my grandmother's old quilt, the good one she left me in her will, the only member of the Monroe clan who had ever looked me in the eyes and said thank you like she meant it. I stood by my apartment window with a chipped mug of weak green tea and looked out over the street, the snow falling soft and steady like the world was trying to hush me back into silence. But I wasn't going quiet this time. I was wide awake. I didn't check my phone right away because I already knew what I'd find. I waited. I cleaned my tiny kitchen, wiped down the fridge door twice, and stared at the oven clock ticking toward mid-morning before I finally gave in and tapped the screen. For missed calls. 2 from Mom. 1 from Dean. 1 from Carol. No one left a voicemail. Of course not. Too proud for that. Still clinging to the idea that I'd call back automatically, the way I always did, tail between my legs, voice sweet and low, asking how I could help, how much they needed, how quickly I could fix it. But that Lena was gone now. Or maybe she'd been dead for years, and I was only just now giving her a proper burial. The house must have gone dark late that night. The gas company works fast when payments vanish and red flags go up. I knew their schedule because I'd once begged them for an extension when Mom forgot the bill during her gallbladder surgery 3 years ago. Funny how the mind holds onto things like that, the exact hold music of the customer service line, the way the man on the phone hesitated when I said, "Please, don't cut them off. I'll pay it now." He had said, "Are you the account holder?" And I'd lied. Yes, I told him, and I paid $178 right there on the spot, using my rent money. Now, nobody was paying anything. Not me. Not anymore. My apartment was warm and still. I watched the day stretch itself across the brick buildings across the street, sunlight bouncing off frosted windows, while in my parents' house, the thermostat was likely blank, the baseboards cold to the touch, and the panic setting in like a second winter. I could imagine my father storming through the hallway in that old flannel robe he refused to throw out, jabbing at the wall like anger could make the heat return. I could see my mother wrapping herself in layers, muttering about how the damn company always messes something up before calling Dean, hoping he'd get an answer out of me. But Dean didn't have a key to me anymore. The truth is, I didn't hate them. That's what people always assume when someone cuts off their family. They think it comes from hatred, but it doesn't. It comes from erosion. From slow, constant wearing away of trust, respect, and belief that things will ever change. It comes from remembering too much, for too long. I remembered being 16 and hiding the pink envelope from the electric company under a stack of school papers because I didn't want my mom to cry again. I remembered the look on my dad's face when I said I got into Northwestern, not pride, not joy, but irritation. "So you think you're better than us now?" he'd asked. That line stuck to my ribs like gristle, never fully digesting. He used to call me Little Miss Leftover when I stayed home on Friday nights to study instead of sneaking off with boys like the neighbor's daughter. It was always half joke, half jab, a name that told me I wasn't the golden child, just the one who didn't screw up loudly enough to get attention. And my mother? She never stopped him. Never once said, "Howard, that's enough." She just pursed her lips and stirred her tea. That was her move, silence. Elegant, sharp-edged silence that let things happen while pretending she had no say. That was the truth I carried, quietly, into adulthood, a truth they all seemed to forget while sitting around that holiday table, biting into overcooked turkey and pretending the past hadn't left cracks in every single one of us. By late afternoon, the first voicemail came. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't even close. My mother's voice was sharp at first, then thin, then frantic. "The heat's not working, and I know you've been messing with things again, Lena. This isn't funny, this isn't okay. You can't just cut us off like this. We have no hot water. I can't feel my fingers. We need you to fix this." Need. There it was. Not want. Not love. Not sorry. Just need. I let the phone sit in my lap for a full 5 minutes before I even looked at the screen again. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I didn't press it. Not yet. Outside, the street lamps were flicking on, pale circles of light pushing back against the early dark. I made another cup of tea. I stood by the window again. And when the phone buzzed a second time, the screen lighting up with "Mom" again, I picked it up. Not because I forgave her, but because something in me was ready now. Not to fix it. To finally say what needed saying. When I finally answered the call, I didn't raise my voice or fill the silence with some grand monologue like I'd rehearsed a dozen times in my head over the years. I just said, calmly and clearly, "You finally ready to talk like adults?" and waited, letting the stillness sit like a loaded gun on the kitchen table. My mother didn't answer right away. I could hear her breath catching through the line, could picture her standing near the hallway phone. Yes, they still had a damn landline, probably pacing in her house slippers, the ones I bought her 2 Christmases ago, because she said her feet were always cold. Cold now, too, I'd bet. But not my problem. When she did speak, it was in that tight, clipped tone that always came before she tried to scold me like I was still 13 and hadn't cleaned my room. "Lena," she said, like my name itself was a burden she had to carry, "this little stunt has gone far enough. Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" That was her first concern. Not the lack of heat. Not the fact that they'd lost the power and couldn't wash their clothes or make toast or use the toilet without boiling water on the stove. No, her concern was image. How this looked. Not even to friends, they didn't have many left. She meant family. Our cousins, our neighbors, her church group. The people who'd always assumed the Monroes were stable, put together, respectable. "The Monroe name means something," she said next, like she was quoting scripture, and I burst out laughing before I could stop myself. "Yeah, it means something all right," I said, still half laughing, half choking on years of swallowed pride. "It means manipulation. It means silence. It means leeching off your own kid while pretending you're above charity." The pause after that felt heavier than anything we'd ever shared, even funerals. Then her voice sharpened. "You are being cruel, Lena. You don't understand the damage you're doing." "You want to talk about damage?" I asked, walking across my apartment with the phone against my cheek, stepping past stacks of unopened mail and folded laundry and the leftover reminders of every sacrifice I'd made to make her life easier. "I gave you everything I had. I gave you my 20s, my savings, my peace of mind. I gave you every damn bill paid on time so you could walk into that grocery store and hold your head high while pretending you still ran the show. But the truth is, you've been running on my back for over a decade, and I'm done carrying you." "You don't mean that," she said, her voice suddenly small, soft, almost human again. That's what she did when things got too real. She shrank down, pulled the poor me card, hoping I'd fold. And maybe once upon a time I would have. But not now. Dean's voice came next, muffled at first, then clearer as he grabbed the phone. "Lena, come on," he said, and I could almost see him rubbing his temple, that fake weary act he used when trying to look mature. "Mom and Dad are struggling. You know this. You've always helped. You've always been, like, the glue." "Oh, we're talking now?" I snapped, not letting him off easy. "Where the hell were you last week when Mom said I'd been living off them? Did your mouth fall off?" He stammered something, probably about not wanting to escalate, but I cut him off before the words could crawl out. "You know what, Dean? Let's just go ahead and clear the air since we're all finally speaking. You remember that rehab center in Arizona you loved to brag about surviving? The one with the mountain views and yoga classes and the therapist you said finally made you feel heard? That cost 20 grand. I paid for that. Not insurance. Not Mom and Dad. Me. All of it. Silence. It was the kind of silence you don't get on phone calls anymore, raw and empty and real. I waited. I could almost hear the pride cracking down his throat. "Lena," he started, but there was nothing else behind it. No thanks. No denial. Just that single word, like he didn't recognize me anymore. Then my mother came back on the line, her tone brittle as old glass. "You didn't do that for us," she said slowly. "You did that for yourself. So you could feel important. So you could play savior." I smiled, tight and bitter, like a wound pulling at the edges. "No," I said, pacing again now, my voice even. "I did it so I wouldn't have to carry your shame. Because I couldn't take the way people looked at you. Because I didn't want your failure tied to my name, even if you never cared about tying mine to yours." "You're being vindictive," she said, the last gasp of a woman who thought she still had leverage. I walked over to my desk, pulled out a small folder of receipts, printouts, bank statements, not the whole pile, just enough to make a point. "If you don't tell the truth to the rest of the family, I will," I said. "I'll send them every transaction, every time I covered your ass. I'll let them know who really kept the Monroe house from falling apart." "You wouldn't," she whispered, but her voice cracked. "Watch me," I said, and hung up the phone. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. For once, I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. I wasn't invited to the New Year's brunch, but that never stopped me before. For 38 years, I'd shown up to family events like a damn soldier, on time, polite, casserole in hand, even when I was seething inside or worn to the bone from holding together a family that never held me back. But this time I didn't come bearing a side dish or a forced smile. I came carrying a manila envelope, thick with proof and thin on mercy. I didn't even put on lipstick. Just tied my hair back, pulled on a clean black coat, and drove across town like I was headed to a courtroom instead of a living room. The Monroe house looked the same as always from the outside, chipped siding, dusty wreath, a porch light that flickered in the wind like it couldn't make up its damn mind whether to shine or die. I parked across the street, turned off the engine, and sat in the silence for a minute, watching the fog gather on the windshield. I wasn't nervous. I was beyond nerves. This wasn't confrontation. This was closure, the cold kind. The kind you have to take, not wait to be offered. Inside, the smell hit me first, overboiled green beans, dry ham, and whatever candle my mother always lit during holidays to make people think we lived better than we did. The sound came next, my cousins laughing, and Carol pouring something into glasses, the clink of forks on plates, the way everyone's voice rose slightly louder when pretending not to hear tension simmering underneath. I stepped into the dining room like a ghost coming back to haunt the scene of her own murder. They went quiet so fast it felt like a vacuum. My mother froze mid-pour, hand hovering above the gravy boat like someone had pressed pause on a scene she didn't like. My father didn't even look up. He just stared down at his plate like there was something fascinating in the mashed potatoes. Dean opened his mouth, but no words came out, just a weird wheeze like his lungs forgot how to lie. I didn't wait for them to find their lines. I set the envelope down on the edge of the table, right between the rolls and the butter dish, and pulled out the copies one by one, neat, deliberate, like I was laying down poker cards that no one else realized I'd been holding for years. Mortgage payments, I said, placing one stack in front of Aunt Carol. Electric bill, gas, water, internet. Here's Dean's rehab receipts, for anyone curious. Another stack went in front of Cousin Taylor, who had once asked me if I ever felt guilty about not helping more. And for good measure, here's a breakdown of every holiday grocery run I covered. Every emergency expense. Every last Venmo and wire transfer and saved you from drowning moment. No one moved. Not even a cough. Just stunned silence. Just so we're clear, I said, turning to the room, my voice steady like a knife balanced on its edge. I never lived off them. But they sure as hell lived off me. My mother looked pale, almost gray. Not angry, stunned. Like she was watching the walls of her perfect Monroe illusion buckle under the weight of years she never cared to count. My father's eyes flicked up just once, then dropped back to his plate like maybe if he didn't look at me, he wouldn't have to feel the shame that had finally arrived, dressed in black and telling the truth. You could have handled this privately, Dean muttered, trying to salvage dignity from the wreckage. You didn't have to humiliate them. I smiled, but it wasn't kind. You're right. But for once, I wanted everyone to see exactly who was holding this family up. Turns out, it was the disappointment daughter with no husband and no kids. Carol's mouth twitched. Maybe she was connecting the dots. Maybe she was remembering how many times I brought extra groceries when someone forgot the cranberry sauce or slipped her cash at Easter without saying why. Maybe she realized the stories she'd been fed about me, selfish, flaky, distant, were just easier to swallow than the truth. I picked up my coat and turned toward the door, but just as I reached it, I heard the voice I was half expecting and dreading all at once. You think this makes you the bigger person? My mother stood behind me, shaking slightly, her lips trembling like she wanted to scream, but had nothing sharp enough to throw. Her voice wasn't cruel this time, just broken. I turned to face her, and I saw it, not regret, not remorse, but fear. The fear of being seen. Of being known for what she really was, not a matriarch, but a passenger in her own life, propped up by a daughter she never had the decency to thank. No, I said, voice low and flat. But at least now I'm not the smaller one. And I meant that. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking to fit inside her story. I was standing in my own, no matter how uncomfortable it made the rest of the room. I walked out without another word, the door clicking shut behind me like the end of a chapter that had taken 3 decades too long to close. The cold air outside hit my face like a slap and a kiss at the same time. I didn't cry. I didn't drive off in a rage. I just stood there for a moment, keys in hand, listening to the wind whistle through the bare trees like it had something important to say, if I could just stop long enough to hear it. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled away slow, leaving the Monroe house and everything I'd propped up inside it behind me. Whether I'd won or not, I didn't know. But I'd finally stopped losing, and sometimes that's enough.